3 kingdoms. I have been a human being for 3 generations, and I have been Emperor Xian of Han for 2 generations. Introduction. In the first generation, I was Emperor Xian of Han, Liu Xie, and I lived a life of string puppets that you are all familiar with. The second, who traveled for over 1800 years and lived once in later generations, truly broadened his horizons. In the third generation, damn it, I am still Emperor Xian of Han, and I was reborn during the chaos of Dong Zhuo's reign. Inside the young body, there are old souls from 2 lifetimes. Through the jade beads hanging in the imperial crown, they glanced at Dong Zhuo, who was arrogant and domineering, and then at Cao Cao, who was in the sour jujube, scanning the aristocratic families in the court and gazing at the 11 feudal lords outside LuoyangHehe. I'll do it. Chapter 1. LV Fengxian, the Great Filial Piety Son who truly shares his father's worries. You are listening at Novel Full.Audio. Luoyang Imperial Palace. On the 30th day of the first month in the first year of Chuping, 9-year-old Liu Xie was sitting bored on the steps outside the Jade Hall, holding a slightly baby-fat little face with both hands, and his big black eyes were staring at the blue sky in a daze. For a long time, he saw the imperial army surrounded by an old acquaintance with a tiger back and a bare waist, coming to the adjacent Jade Hall. The person looked at Liu Xie on the stairs with a lewd smile, said a few words to a handsome young man wearing armor next to him, then slapped his belly and burst into laughter as he entered the hall. The handsome young man took orders and strode towards Liu Xie, with Jia making a loud and imposing sound. He came to the bottom of Liu Xie's steps, looked up at the emperor, and casually arched his hand, saying, "Lord Lv Bu of Chengdu Pavilion, pay respects to your majesty." The voice is resounding and powerful, full of confidence. Liu Xie watched as Lv Buling was lost in thought, his small eyebrows slowly furrowing. A thought that was as distant as 2 lifetimes floated in his heart, and a thought-provoking smile appeared on his tender little face. Dong Xianghua, indulging in debauchery during the day, doesn't need to deal with military affairs, is it so idle? Lu Bu blinked his eyes, not knowing how to answer. Oh, I forgot. Dong Xianghua just flicked his finger and didn't delay anything. I was too worried. Liu Bu's eyes twitched and he arched his hand, saying, Your Majesty, you should know what to say about the relocation of the capital for tomorrow's court meeting. Liu Xie looked at Liu Bu playfully and said to himself, Marquis Lv, the Prime Minister has worked hard and achieved great success, but he has no children under his command. As the adopted son of the Prime Minister, how can you not share your father's worries? Lv Bu looked up and down at Liu Xie again, his eyes full of confusion, as if the person in front of him was completely different from the fierce and cunning young emperor before him. Your Majesty, I advise you to pay attention to your words. The tone was filled with a strong threat. Liu Xie sneered and said slowly, Dong Zhuo's concubine, Lady Sun, is quite easy to raise. Just now, Lv Bu, who was still in high spirits, sweated profusely from his forehead as Tsinsen was visible to the naked eye. His eyes instantly became fearful, and he quickly glanced at the Western young soldiers guarding Liu Xie. It was 2 zhang away from here, so he probably couldn't hear their conversation. Hurriedly ran up a few steps, knelt down and saluted, with a trembling voice. Your Majesty. On Liu Xie's face, there was no chaos, but on his heart, he was ecstatic. Slowly getting up, patting the soil under his buttocks, he threw a smile that even a man could understand at Liu Bu. However, this smile, when placed on a 9-year-old child, was very discordant. Do me a favor, heaven knows and earth knows, you know and I know. Liu Bu froze for a moment before lowering his voice and muttering, What are you busy with? Liu Xie reached out to help Lv Bu and said, Marquis Lv, please get up quickly. I understand what the Prime Minister entrusted me with. Then he lowered his voice and said, Help me send a secret letter out. Liu Bu's body trembled and he stared at Liu Xie, unable to speak. Liu Xie raised his eyebrows, said nothing more, and turned around to return to the Jade Hall. Returning to the dormitory, Liu Xie knelt in front of the desk, spread out the silk, picked up a brush, and confidently prepared to write a secret letter. The reason why he dares to be so confident and fearless is actually that Dong Zhuo's surveillance of him is not strict. A 9-year-old child can still come up with any tricks, as long as he does not escape or let outsiders touch him, let him wander in the hall. Liu Xie remained calm and began to calculate. Sure enough, my speculation is not wrong. Dong Zhuo is over 50 years old, and he doesn't lack women around him. How could he have a son and a daughter? His son died early, and his daughter married Mingfu. After that, he had nothing to do. In his year of the tiger and wolf, he only achieved that feat. Now that he's over 50, is that enough? According to historical records, Dong Zhuo stayed overnight on a dragon bed, indulging in debauchery with palace maids, concubines, and princesses. Later, he built a fortress in Chang'an and selected 800 beautiful women. It sounds quite impressive, but it's actually him who can't do it himself, yet he always blames himself for not being able to have a son to inherit the family business he laid down. A year and a half later, among Dong Zhuo's concubines, only Sun gave birth to a son, which is somewhat unusual. Or that question, why is only the land of the Sun family producing output? If he were just a time traveler, even a prominent figure in the study of Eastern Han historiography would not know who the concubine was and when she gave birth, because there is no mention of it in history books. Coincidentally, his first life was actually Emperor Xian of Han, Liu Xie himself, who was a witness to the events and knew many things that were not recorded in historical books. Coincidentally, his second son was fortunate enough to live in the 21st century. After watching Romance of the Three Kingdoms with great interest, one of the passages was about Wang Yunxiao using a beauty trick. His mind suddenly lit up and he thought of a possibility. Although Jiao Chan was fictional, it was true that Lu Bu had an affair with his concubine. So, could that child? Of course, this is purely a boring guess and of no use at all. But the most coincidental thing is that when I opened my eyes early this morning, I found myself back again, and it was also Emperor Xian of Han. This kind of time travel mode, even Liu Xie, who has read many online articles, feels quite outrageous. Well, strictly speaking, this should be called rebirth, a kind of time travel mode where you don't have to green yourself, which is quite good. In the first life, it was half a lifetime of hard work, but the 400-year reign of the Han dynasty was still lost in his own hands. He hated himself for his cowardice, his incompetence, and his belief in the wrong person, which was enough to overflow his lifelong regret. The second, he lived a vibrant life but was not happy. He felt that the Mingfu soup he drank was expired, and the memories of his past life were extremely clear. The strong regret that could not be resolved or dissolved filled his whole life. In order to alleviate this feeling, he deliberately studied and mastered a lot of knowledge and skills that could solve various problems in the first life. Now that he has truly returned, Liu Xie is very grateful for the foresight of the second emperor. When he first learned so much useful and useless knowledge, he now has a place to use it, such as the insignificant speculation before. So, with a sudden inspiration just now, he tricked Lv Bu. As expected, the speculation from the previous life was correct, and Lv Bu had already given Dong Zhuo green. Fengxian is truly a great filial son who shares his father's worries. With this handle, you also have a good chip. How can you use this handle? Directly instigate Lv Bu, as in the previous world, to counter-kill Dong Zhuo. Liu Xie couldn't help but shake her head and give up the idea. When he was just gazing at the sky outside the palace, he quietly observed the situation of the Forbidden Army in the southern palace. At this time, the Forbidden Army was all soldiers of the Western Liang dynasty, which was the legitimate lineage of Dong Zhuo. At this time, the previous life was still young and did not pay attention to these details. Looking back now, it was not until after Chang'an that Dong Zhuo stationed his legitimate troops in Meiwu, and the imperial palace was replaced by the mixed formation of Bingzhou soldiers and the 3 auxiliary soldiers. Only then did LV Bu and Wang Yun have an opportunity to take advantage of it. Even if I successfully plot against Lu Bu now, he dare not take action in the palace. It seems that Wang Yun's tricks are still not feasible at this time and place. That is to say, if you want to use LV Bu to counter-kill Dong Zhuo, you have to wait until after the westward migration. So after ruling out this path, Liu Xie realized another value of Lu Bu in the midst of the lightning and fire just now. As Dong Zhuo's adopted son, LV Bu can have unobstructed access to the imperial palace and even the entire Luoyang city. Liu Xie, who was under house arrest, wanted to pass on the message, and Lu Bu was the only and best medium, which is why he had the idea of having Lu Bu pass on the secret message just now. However, Lu Bu is the kind of person who is untrustworthy, disloyal, and unfilial. If he were to pass on the secret message, would he transfer it to Dong Zhuo? Liu Xie took several deep breaths to calm himself down from some chaotic thoughts. Leaving Luoyang, coupled with Dong Zhuofang's big fire, directly led to the downfall of the Eastern Han dynasty, and also marked the beginning of his own life of turmoil and nightmares. Since I am reborn at this critical time, I need to find a way to prevent the relocation of the capital to Chang'an and make up for my biggest regret before. The most effective way to prevent the relocation of the capital to Chang'an is to kill Dong Zhuo. Just killing Dong Zhuo is not enough, and we also need to prevent his subordinates from launching a counterattack. We must not repeat the mistakes of Wang Yun. Liu Xie calculated the time. On February 17th, both myself and the whole city will be driven out of Luoyang. That is to say, at most 17 days. We need to take down Dong Zhuo and also dismantle the Western Liang army. Leaving aside whether I can communicate with the outside world or not, I'm only 9 years old now. Who would listen to my commands? After much thought, time was tight and the task was heavy. Liu Xie felt a bit disheartened and shook his head with a bitter smile. Even though I have 2 lifetimes buffs, this situation is still unsolvable. Dong Zhuo hammered his waist as thick as a bucket of water and walked with a slight wobble. He let out a heavy sigh and looked up to catch a glimpse of the young and strong LV Bu pacing outside, with a hint of jealousy flashing in his eyes. My son Fengxian, what did the little emperor say about the westward migration? LV Bu quickly bowed and replied. The emperor replied that he understood what the prime minister had entrusted. Oh. So ambiguous, what does he mean he knows? Dong Zhuo's face instantly turned cold. Liu Bu bent lower and dared not breathe. Upon seeing this, Dong Zhuo just snorted coldly and quickly walked past LV Bu with a flick of his robe sleeve. It can be seen that Dong Zhuo is holding an evil fire in his stomach. Liu Bu looked at Dong Zhuo's subdued steps with a look of resentment on his face. 8 out of 10 surrendered early again, right? Don't ask me how I found out, it wasn't Sun who said it afterwards. Just as I thought of this, I couldn't help but think of that innocent and wicked face again, and I couldn't help but shiver. Chapter 2. This unfortunate fate. It's truly wonderful. You are listening at novel full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 3. Qi Jia and so on were already taken to feed the dog. You are listening at novel full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 4. Today's one small step, holding power one big step. You are listening at novel full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 5. This wave of operations has made me dizzy. You are listening at novel full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 6. Wang Yun of Infernal Affairs. You are listening at novel full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 7. I, Liu Bu, have drifted away for half of my life, only hating that I have not met my Mingfu. You are listening at novel full.audio. Why hasn't LV Fengxian come yet? Did I miscalculate? When Liu Xie thought of Lu Bu, he couldn't help but think of the memes about Lu Bu in later generations. Liu Bu, have been wandering for half of my life, only wishing I hadn't met my Mingfu. He has been wandering for half of his life, but in fact, he has never met a wise master. He is a person with real skills in leading cavalry, but unfortunately, he is unpredictable, eager for quick success and instant benefits, and a good seedling has not been led by a wise master. Liu Xie paid attention to every literary and political figure who shone in that era in the first generation, and analyzed them beyond the limitations of the era in the second generation. With these 2 lifetimes as a foundation, he can close his eyes and memorize the hometown background and subsequent military achievements of literary officials and generals during the late Han and Three Kingdoms periods, as well as their ultimate fate. Fate is a combination of personality and luck, and Liu Xie has a clear and thorough understanding of it. After a series of actions, his return this time will inevitably lead to a stormy butterfly effect, and history will definitely deviate far from its original trajectory. As a prophet, it will definitely be hopeless. However, based on their personalities, it is predicted that they will have at least 70% control over their actions. Liu Xie was still daydreaming here when he saw a familiar head exposed at the door. Who else could it be if it weren't Liu Bu? Liu Xie couldn't help but show a proud smile. I will give you another final blow, making you become a servant with 3 surnames 2 years in advance. Marquis Lu, everyone has come, you haven't come in yet. Upon hearing this, Liu Bu chuckled and quickly stepped into the threshold, bowing deeply and saying, Liu Bu, pay my respects to your majesty. Marquis Liu, what are you doing here for? Liu Bu looked around the room and then asked, how did you know that the Prime Minister was planning to explore the tombs of emperors throughout history? Liu Xie looked at Liu Bu with a smile in his eyes and said, didn't you tell me that yourself? Liu Bu stumbled and almost stumbled, saying, Your Majesty, aren't you slandering me? Do you believe in Xianghua or not? Liu Bu had a gloomy face and a bitter smile. Liu Xie added a spark and said, next time, I can't keep it a secret from Marquis Liu. The Prime Minister is too terrifying. Liu Bu knelt down with a thud and said, Your Majesty, please spare me. Liu Xie broke his fingers and calculated, the first thing is that he had an affair with the Sun family, intending to imitate the method of Liu Bu and Li Daitao. The second thing is that if he leaks the secret, he will dig into the imperial tomb. Liu Bu kept kowtowing incessantly, knowing that anything that Dong Zhuo knew was a dead end for him. Your Majesty, I am willing to deliver your message. Liu Xie saw that the effect of coercion had been achieved, and it was time to move on to the next step of enticing. Marquis Liu, do you have a beloved daughter named Liu Xie? Liu Bu widened his eyes and looked at the emperor with some horror. He struggled to understand how this little devil knew about such a small matter. Your Majesty. You have something to do with me. Liu Xie is the flesh of Liu Bu's heart. In the past, Liu Bu was besieged by Cao Cao in the city of Shepi and broke out with his daughter on his back, indicating that Liu Bu was not an ungrateful person. His weakness was this daughter. Marquis Liu, do you want to be my father? Law. Your daughter is 6 years old this year, and I am 9 years old. Your daughter is intelligent and clever, and I am also a talented person. Isn't this a perfect match made in heaven and earth? Your Majesty, what do you mean? Liu Bu was stunned by this great news, and he was a bit confused. Maybe conferred the title of noble. Noble person. Liu Bu digested this information for a long time before weakly probing, can it be the queen? Liu Xie snorted coldly and said, if I were to deceive you, I would agree to appoint Liu Xie as your queen. Anyway, I don't have to keep my promise. On the contrary, I will appoint her as a noble person, which is sincerity. Liu Bu didn't sort out the ways inside for a moment, but felt that the emperor's words were very reasonable. On the one hand, the position of empress is the mother of a country. How can I confirm it now? Marquis Liu, I am only 9 years old. Upon hearing this, Lu Bu couldn't resist and rolled his eyes. 9 years old. Playing around with all of us at the age of 9. I think you understand the principle of blaming someone for their mistakes. Instead of always worrying about being remembered by others, it's better to be a noble person and be down to earth. Isn't it much safer? Becoming my father in law is better than calling someone else a godfather. A great man born between heaven and earth, how can he remain depressed for a long time? Liu Xie directly applied the famous lines of Lu Bu from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and he felt that they were too appropriate to use here. Liu Bu was trembling slightly all over, feeling that his brain was completely inadequate. The only hint of reason asked, Your Majesty, do you want me to betray the Prime Minister? No, just honestly help me deliver the letter. Really? Is it that simple? Yes, it's just that simple. Liu Bu looked directly at the emperor and said, Your Majesty, you won't go back on your word, will you? Liu Xie laughed heartily and said, Marquis LV, do you think I am you? Although he said with a smile, his tone was cold and unfriendly. Upon hearing this, LV Bu quickly lowered his head and no longer dared to look directly at the emperor. Liu Xie said leisurely, What is a great man? He is not a man who is 9 feet tall, but a person who keeps his word. Only then can he stand between heaven and earth, and not be inferior to others. Marquis LV, since Dong Zhuo wanted to move westward to Chang'an, the defeat has been determined. People in Luoyang can seek the world, but when they return to Chang'an, their goal is nothing more than to survive and enjoy wealth. Even though Dong Zhuo had the first emperor and the great talent and strategy of Emperor Gaozu, the Guanzhong area at this time was no longer the same as the Guanzhong area at that time, and there was no possibility of sweeping the 6 harmonies and unifying the world. You, Liu Bu, have been wandering for half of your life, only hating that you have not met the Ming Lord. Whether it is Ding Yuan or Dong Zhuo, they all treat you as a thug. Little did they know that you have already led everyone in the Han dynasty in that sudden ride. You were originally a starving wolf who had entered the enemy line, but you were trapped in the fame and fortune market and turned into a begging dog. Am I the master? Are you going to betray Dong Zhuo? You decide for yourself. Liu Xie's words struck directly at Lu Bu's soul, and upon hearing them, Lu Bu's face turned red and his eyes widened, bloodshot. The person knelt there, trembling all over, and remained silent for a long time. After holding back a sentence for a long time, he smiled bitterly and said, Your Majesty, do you still understand the method of sudden riding? The reason for this question is that what he is most proud of is not his bravery, but his cavalry. Lu Bu, relying on his talent, realized that when cavalry faced an infantry formation, they could not use cavalry shooting to break through the enemy, but rather use sudden cavalry to break through the formation. The essential difference between the two is that the former relies mainly on bows and crossbows and horseback archery, while the latter relies mainly on spears and ring-headed swords to pierce through enemy lines. Although the difference may seem small, in reality, the tactics, weapons, and even horse equipment are completely different. This advanced warfare method did not make Ding Yuan and Dong Zhuo realize his true value, but only utilized Lu Bu with the courage of a flying general. Although achieving glory, wealth, and glory, there is still a feeling of lack of ambition and the regret that heroes are useless in martial arts. Liu Xie nodded and said, If you deal with the Chang people and the Xianbei people, the difference is not significant. If you deal with the infantry formation, the sudden cavalry will be a powerful weapon to break through the formation. Liu Bu inexplicably shed tears smashing onto the ground. Okay, I'll do it. I never expected that your Majesty could understand this way. You are the one who truly understands Weichen. I hope your Majesty can take care of the dog girl, and I will never hesitate to die. Liu Xie let out a sigh of relief in his heart. Those who are close friends die, perhaps this time LV Bu is genuinely willing to be loyal. I will not betray you, I will not betray you. Can you help me deliver that letter to Situ Yanggong? Lu Bu wiped away his tears, got up and bowed to take orders, responding heavily, "No." Immediately thinking of something, he quickly asked, "Your Majesty, can you understand the letter from Duke Yang?" Liu Xie looked at Lu Bu with a smile on his face, which was awkward, and his thick skin turned red. "Who else has read this letter?" "This." "Who?" "Wang Yun, the fellow villager of Weichen." Lv Bu's mouth went blank and he still spoke out. He looked at the emperor with some embarrassment. But I saw a smile hanging from the corner of the emperor's mouth, with a look that was as expected. If Yang Gong can't understand it, his eldest son Yang Xiu will definitely be able to understand it. By the way, tell Yang Gong to keep it confidential when looking for Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com, and not to speak to others. In the future, he will also use this method to communicate with me. Liu Bu was at a loss. He couldn't understand why the emperor's proud smile was there, let alone why Yang Gongzi could understand it. However, when faced with this demon, he could do whatever he said, thinking so much. Just as he was about to turn around, he suddenly remembered something and quickly took out the package of pastries from his arms. He held them in his hands and said, "The Prime Minister strictly ordered that your Majesty run out of food. I secretly brought some for you. I hope your Majesty doesn't mind the food being crude." Liu Xie raised her eyebrows and took it over with a smile, saying, "Uncle Xie has a big body and is very grateful to my son.in.law." Upon hearing this, Lv Bu was overjoyed and moved. There was a burning fire in his heart, warm and warm. The sound of his father.in.law could be said to have touched his heart. He didn't know what to say, he just nodded again and stepped back from the room. Liu Xie looked at the figure of Lv Bu leaving, feeling uneasy. The key goal of the first step is to achieve it, and I can finally convey the message to the outside world. Thinking of Lv Lingqi again, although I have never seen her in the past life, I have heard that she is also a beautiful embryo. The reason why Liu Xie can only be given the position of a noble person, rather than the position of an empress, is not only due to the two reasons mentioned earlier, but also due to several regrets in his past life. Empress Fu and Dong Zhuo both died tragically at the hands of Cao Cao, and this life is absolutely impossible. In addition, Empress Xian, who had seen Cao Pai in the past and present, as Cao Ji said in his Ode to the Gods of Luo, was truly more beautiful than a celestial being. She was also well versed in poetry and literature, dignified and virtuous, and could become a mother of the country. Although she is only 9 years old, Zhen is only 7 years old. But no matter how big or small a man is, after several lifetimes, he can always keep his original intention unchanged. This is a man. Chapter 8, 4th Generation, 3rd Duke, Hongnong, Yang Family. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 9. Which is difficult to stand alone or die. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text. Chapter 10. Undercurrent Surges. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. De Co Lois Ara Trong Quatrin Lay Text.